This is a live that we're doing all about the top 5 financial mistakes that we see photographers making so that you can avoid them, hopefully, or fix them if you have. As a coach for photographers for 8 or 9 years now, I've seen the inside of a lot of businesses. And, something that's really common that we're going to kind of get into in a little bit is this financial anxiety. So I know this is not necessarily the most fun topic, but we'll try and make it as fun as possible and try and take some of that stress away. So, as you can see, I'm joined today by with my friend Perry from Found. Hey Perry, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for
Good.
having me on.
Of course. So he and I are going to be kind of flip-flopping our little presentation for you guys. And Found is an all-in-one banking app for the self-employed. They offer smart business banking and powerful, easy-to-use tools to make bookkeeping and taxes and invoicing simpler than ever. So he's going to kind of give us a little bit of taste of what they do over at Found to help us small business entrepreneurs stay on top of all of these things without making it overcomplicated. But we're going to go really deep into that next Wednesday on my podcast. So just know that this is sort of like your little precursor. We're going to kind of dive into this, but then we're going to go even deeper into it next Wednesday. So you definitely want to make sure that you are tuning in then. Okay. So we're going to kind of walk you through this. We're going to pop up some slides. We're each going to kind of be chatting about that. Perry's going to share his screen with the slides in a second. And then we're going to just kind of dive in and talk about these 5 things that trip us up. And we want to make sure we avoid that. So, all right, you ready, Perry?
I'm ready. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. I think today is a lot about the kind of the problem. And so we've talked with a lot of small business owners, and particularly photographers that have used our platform. And we've seen actually a lot of these common themes. And so it'll be fun to kind of come with each of our own perspective on the problem. And then next week, really spend the bulk of the time talking about the solution that Found offers.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Because I'm all about solutions that make us feel really good. Because if like something doesn't feel good, you're just not going to do it, right? And so we want to make sure we're offering that for you guys. All right. So, yep, I can see your screen. It looks good. I'm looking at all my things here.
Perfect.
That's
Why don't you kick
always
us off,
good.
Renee? Mistake
Let's
number one.
Yeah, I'm going to kick us off with for the first mistake that we see these photographers make, like a lot of us do, is not having upfront clear financial goals just in general, right? So it's really important to go into the year with a profit goal for your business and then make a plan to hit that goal. Because you can't get to where you want to go if you don't identify that with clarity. And because a lot of us have this anxiety, we tend to not want to look at that. We tend to like sort of want to just not pay attention to some of these things, but that's not a really good viable answer. And we know this, but getting past that sort of like those limiting beliefs, and we'll get to that in a second, can be hard. So just know that, we're going to kind of walk through some of that. All right. So on the next slide, we did this poll recently in the group. I put this poll here in the group to kind of see where you guys were at with all this. And it kind of shows where I already kind of knew, most people were or have been at least. So you guys tend to mostly wait until the last minute or, constantly playing catch up, which is not ideal either. So we know that that is a really big common thing. And I know, Perry, you guys see this a lot too on
Definitely.
your end as well, which is why you guys offer solutions for this.
Yep. Yeah, we'll talk about the procrastination piece a little bit, specifically around taxes later in this live.
Yeah.
And I know that that can be a huge pain point is like finances generally, but taxes specifically is one of those things like there's quarterly tax payments and there's tax day at the end of the year. And so like I'm going to save that until the last minute. And then it's
Yeah.
this like mad scramble to try to get the paperwork together. So totally.
Yeah. 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 Because it's not fun. So we don't want to do it. But we're going to talk about how you can make that a little bit more fun. So yeah, we know that not tracking stuff like this is going to lead to, undercharging for products and services, like not pricing yourself appropriately, That's a really big one. Obviously, we don't want to do that. Missed growth opportunities. You have to have these clear financial goals to help you identify when it's feasible for you to invest in growth opportunities, such as equipment, marketing efforts, education, whatever that might be. It's going to lead to a lot of increased financial stress. And, we really know that. It doesn't make it go away. It makes them bigger, right? Running from the stress and the anxiety of it all just kind of makes it bigger. It makes it feel like you've got this monkey on your back and it's just getting heavier. So, a lot of photographers might feel like they're just constantly in this state of financial uncertainty, which is not a good feeling to have. And that way, you never know if you can cover your expenses or generate a stable income. So, we want to avoid that for sure. And then, of course, there's retirement uncertainty. A lot of people don't even really want to think about that right now because you think about, like, oh, I've got time for that. But you really need to be thinking about it now, ideally. And then, obviously, what we kind of touched on a little bit there was this lack of preparedness for tax obligations because nobody wants to get stuck with an unexpected tax bill. Not ideal. So, what you want to do, you want to understand these numbers, right? Like, so the things that you kind of want to stay on top of, just like the very basic nature of it, revenue or income, right? So, like, obviously, pricing and how much you are going to bring in per job, and also a lot of you guys shoot various, genres of photography, and your pricing might be different for a lot of these things. So knowing that, and also volume, how many jobs you want to take on, how many can you take on, how many you want to take on, and those expenses, obviously, we know a lot about those, but they add up, and some of them, you know, go unnoticed, I feel like, but we really need to have a clear picture of what those are. So, gear, whether you have a studio space or all of those subscriptions that we have to pay for to keep our business running, all of the software, all of the CRMs and things like that. Owners pay contractors, but we do that. And then obviously profit is the holy grail. And then there's that gross profit versus the net profit, right? So you got to use that goal to kind of steer your pricing and the number of gigs that you want. Without those clear financial goals, you're going to struggle to determine the right kinds of jobs. You might be just taking on a whole bunch of stuff because you live in this feast or famine mode. And that's what we want to try and avoid. Like, that's the main thing that we want to try and avoid, is we don't want to be in that constant cycle of feast or famine, which happens a lot because you get busy and then you don't, take care of your marketing, and you also don't look at your books, and then you get really behind. So, yeah. All right, next slide. So then, yeah, you want to be asking yourself, what should I be measuring? Where do I get that information? All of these things. And even within it, right, there's little sub accounts, right? Like under savings. So yes, we think about savings, but even within that, you want to have an emergency savings. You want that to be like 1 to 3 months, ideally, of living expenses, depending on where you are in life. You want to have retirement savings, and then you want to have some savings for the stuff that you need to keep your business going. And those can get really confusing, I feel like, for people, because it's like, well, I need to save, but unless you're like breaking those up into smaller categories, you really can't get a clear picture of like exactly how much you want to be saving for what, if that makes sense. Right, Perry? Like, that's kind of a big,
Definitely.
big factor with all of this, is like, and then that obviously runs into like having poor cash flow management because of it, because you don't know
Yep.
what the targets are, you know?
Yep. And a lot of it becomes extra complicated when some of these buckets of savings, some of these buckets of money, or these cash flow needs are short term. So things like paying subcontractors is something you should be doing on a short term basis, on a project per project basis, whereas some of them are maybe less urgent but equally important. So things like
Mm.
refilling that rainy day emergency savings fund, or saving up for like a critical new piece of equipment. And so balancing, having full visibility into like both what are all these different buckets, what's short term versus long term, and how can you ensure that based off the money coming in the door, that you're adequately allocating cash to each of those categories. And we'll talk about that in a bit as we talk about some of the future mistakes coming up.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to number two. This is the the hit parade of the mistakes, I think. It's just avoiding it, you know? It's just avoiding regularly looking at your finances, whether it's your bookkeeping, whether it's the income, all of it. A lot of photographers tend to avoid their business finances because it's, like I said before, it's overwhelming. It can be triggering a lot. And you kind of feel like, well, what I don't know won't kill me, but that's not the way through this. I understand that thinking. And I know, you know, hopefully a lot of you guys are on that journey of working through it, because you can't get through anything unless you look at it. That's kind of the first step, right? We have to like look at it and acknowledge it. And the goal with this too, on a side note, because I'm going to get like a little psychological with you guys, but like, we don't want to, you know, the goal is to not judge ourselves. The goal is to not beat yourself up that you don't look at it. Like, this is not what this is about. And I don't want you to beat yourself up either, because that's just going to cause more stress and anxiety. The goal is just to kind of be in this neutral space with it, right? So, like, getting to like this place of, okay, yes, I just have to do this. It's not necessarily something I love to do, but maybe we can actually make that a little bit fun. And we'll talk about that in a second. So we know that if you are constantly not looking at your finances, obviously your stress and anxiety is going to get higher because it's the unknown, right? And so the unknown is always more stressful. And the fix for that is having clarity, even if there's not as much money in that account as you would like it to be. You can't actually build it unless you are looking at it with honesty and like neutrality, really. Um, this can cause a lot of issues, though. Obviously, lost revenue opportunities, like poor pricing. Again, you're not going to know how to appropriately price yourself and what you really should be making if you don't know what those numbers are, right? So, like, yes, cost of goods, cost of doing business, things like that. But also, what do you actually need to make? Like, what is that number? And looking at it with like just honesty, and also looking at it kind of future pacing a little bit too, and saying, okay, well, what would I like to make ideally? Like, what would give me some extra money? What would give me the chance to take my family on vacations and things like that? But not looking at it can really impair those relationships with like your labs. Budget mismanagement is a really big one too, because if you're not looking, you don't really know where you're budgeting and what you're budgeting for. It's just kind of all over the place. And then obviously these missed taxed obligations. It's a really big one. You can't really run from taxes, sadly. They just keep coming to find you. So all of these things are obviously things that could happen if you are not doing that. And the main cause of all of this, of not looking at your finances and not being in them like on a regular basis, is that stress. And that's really kind of what I want to talk about in how to fix this. So one of my biggest tips on how to kind of fix this is to have a weekly date with your money. I think we can go to, yeah. You want to make this fun. Okay. We're creatives. We have creative brains. You've got to work with the brain that you have. And I'm going to be the first to say, like, this was not fun for me when I first started having to pay attention to all of this. And it took me a good 2 years, I want to say, before I was able to shift it into something that was a little bit more fun. And so the way that I was able to do that is that I have like a weekly date with my money. And I like to do mine on Fridays. You can do it on any day of the week. But for me, Friday is just that day. Yeah, sometimes I'm shooting in the afternoon, but I don't love to take on a lot of meetings and a lot of things on Fridays. So for me, that's just the day that feels good, right? Like, you kind of have to figure that out for yourself. But do it, put it on the calendar and make it fun, right? You can even gamify the process. Like you can reward yourself with something. I'm not saying go out and spend, thousands of dollars on something because you're doing your weekly date with money, but maybe you can reward yourself with a small something, whatever that might be. Again, you have to know yourself and your reward systems, but everybody is motivated by rewards. They just really are. We all are, especially creatives. And so we also like the novelty and the new as creatives. So sometimes maybe mix it up, like go to a coffee shop to have the date with your money, go sit and, outside in nature at a park, as long as you can get Wi-Fi if you want to have your date with money, but make it something that is like, I'm really big on rituals. And I feel like that is a really big factor in getting yourself to do it, right? So light a candle, have a cup of coffee, maybe have a glass of wine if you're doing this on Friday afternoon, whatever it is, but like make it something that feels good to you. Like let yourself kind of go there with it and say, okay, what would actually make me want to have this date with my money? And so it doesn't feel so charged and triggering and like, oh my God, I have to do this, because we're all programmed by childhood, by watching the other adults in our lives and all of those different things over the years. And so we all have this like programming around money, whatever it is. And some of you guys have good programming, and that's fantastic. I'm jealous because I did not have that at all. And so we all have our own stuff that we tend to carry with us and then have to work through for the rest. That's what being an adult is about. So I want you to come up with your own fun date with money and make it enjoyable, make it fun, gamify it. Maybe like you score points, or, like I said, like you got to find what works for you. Just like with your kids, like this is just like if you were dealing with your kids and you want them to do something. It's way better to reward them than to punish. We know that psychologically, it just works better. And so if you're constantly punishing yourself, do you really think you're going to get this done? No. So flip it on its head and make it fun and reward yourself with something pleasurable. Like for me, I can't really necessarily listen to something that I have to pay attention to in the background when I'm doing this, but I will put on music, right? So like I can put on music, and sometimes if it's just like basic stuff that I'm sort of recording and kind of going through, I can watch something on my iPad. But it depends on what it is, right? Like so if it's something light and fluffy like Queer Eye, I can just put that on, but if it's something that's going to like really I'm gonna have to really pay attention to, I can't. So, that's definitely I highly recommend. Also, you can do this with a friend, right? Like if you have a local entrepreneur buddy who is also struggling with this kind of stuff and needs to do it, go and meet up together. Like meet at the coffee shop, have lunch, and do it together. I've done this with my friend Jackie, and it's been like makes it way more fun. That's for sure. So another thing too that you can do is like create a visual progress board. This is something that we used to do with my son who has autism and ADHD, and it works for creatives really well if we make a visual like board, right? So like maybe that looks like a whiteboard, or you can put like sticky notes until it fills up. So maybe like the whole month, or you have like one of those giant calendars. I love those giant calendars you can get on Amazon. And you can just like put like like a whiteboard. You can like check it off, or you can put something sticky on it to just like see the visual representation of like, oh yeah, I've done my weekly date with money every week this month. Go me, and then you can kind of give yourself something for that. So I really want you guys to start reframing this, because that is the key to everything, right? Like we can allow our unconscious to just keep running the show, which it wants to do because it runs about 90% of our brain on the daily. But ideally, we want to step in and we want to say, no, that's how we've always done it. And that's what's keeping us safe. But what we need to do and what's going to move us forward is breaking that pattern. So that's kind of what I want to throw
And
in there.
Renee, you said a little bit about how you do this coffee shop,
Mhm.
sometimes with a friend, sometimes with music in the background. more tangibly, like how long does this take? Like how long are you
Mhm.
setting aside, and like what is the kind of the checklist of things you're working through
Yeah.
during each weekly date?
Honestly, I mean, like, because if you keep up with this and you're doing it weekly, it really shouldn't take you that long. I mean,
Yeah.
ideally, you're just going through because like I've got everything synced up, right, from the bank and everything is there in the system. And so ideally, you want to have a system that is going to have everything in its place. So a lot of that can be even automated, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But ideally, like I want to say I block off 30 minutes, like on my calendar because I'm really big on time blocking. Because if it's on my
Yeah.
calendar, I'm going to get it done. And,
Yep.
I'm really big about that. And I know that a lot of people struggle with that sort of stuff too. But if you put it on your calendar and you set an alarm, like, 15 minutes beforehand, you're way more likely to get it done if you just have it scheduled. So at least just
Yeah.
give that a try. So for me, yeah, I block off 30, but it's realistically maybe 15, 20 minutes, depending on what I'm doing, or if I get a little distracted in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just kind of recording. Like I said, I'm just like making sure things are lined up, categorized appropriately, because that's just kind of something I want to be able to at the end of each quarter, just run the report. Like I don't want to have to like
Yep.
do anything. I don't want to have to like catch up and remember what I did. I want it to all be there and it's all there. But sometimes, things might not be categorized the right way or something like that. But it's also a good way for me to just project out. So, like, okay, here's where I
Right.
am. But okay, I'm also looking at my CRM because, I'll have all of my invoicing in there as well. So it shows me all my jobs. Okay, well, next month I've got X amount coming in for sure. But then I also have like these 3 ordering sessions. So, we don't know
Yep.
exactly how much money is going to be coming in for each of those, but I have a pretty good idea because I have minimums on my sessions. So I know
Yeah.
that, okay, if this person has an experience session with me, that's like a minimum $3,500 sale. So I can project a little bit better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the idea, is that you want to be able to like look and justify the accounts and stuff, but then you want to like go, oh, okay, how much money am I making next month, next week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. I like that framework of like both looking back at the past week or maybe month till date or quarter till date and saying like how much have I made? How much have I been spending? Making sure I'm categorizing all those expenses and like how am I tracking towards that, quarterly or annual goal that we set in
Hmm.
the first mistake. But then also the forward looking aspect of it of looking at your pipeline of projects and trying to like forecast out where you're going to close that gap. And
Yeah.
it's great that it can be done in 15, 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah, and that's ideally what you want. You don't want this to take up half your day. Like that's not fun.
Yeah.
I'm a type 7 Enneagram. I want to have fun. So I don't want to sit at my computer and like look at numbers all day, but I do like getting it done and it feels really good, right? Like so I also have
Yeah.
like a little automation. So I use Zapier for a lot of things, and I have Zapier connected to PayPal and to Stripe. So when people pay me, I get like a little ching on my phone.
Nice. I love it.
So you got to do little things like that to just make you feel good about money, because again, like
Yeah.
so many of us have all this programming of like it's not fun, it's whatever. And even people who are drawn to it, like I know a lot of photographers who have a background in accounting, which is really interesting and I think
Oh
awesome.
wow.
Yeah, and even though, even they will tell you, yeah, if you make it fun, it will definitely get you to do it more.
Yep.
That's for sure.
And we'll
Yeah.
we'll talk a lot about this next week, but Fallon's thought a lot about with our platform specifically, a lot of the emotions that but like
Mm,
the colors and the design can ultimately evoke, and you'll see that firsthand as we walk through that next week.
yeah.
And we've also built in little opportunities for little dopamine hits as you categorize expenses and realize tax savings, all that fun stuff. So yeah, totally aligned, and encourage folks to tune in next week
Yeah,
for
for
a peek
sure.
at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the next mistake is not having a budget or understanding your cash flow, right? So obviously this, concept of cash flow across various elements of your business, a really big issue for photographers specifically, and probably a lot of other types of creators, but like, I know you guys because I'm one of you, is the seasonality of our business, right? A lot of, especially, if you live on the East Coast, Perry's on the East Coast, and if you live in an area where you're not going to be shooting year round. Now, I do, just like disclaimer, I live in Southern California, so I do shoot year round, but there are still season stuff. Like January through March is still slower for me. Like I can still do it, but it's just especially for seniors, you know what I mean? Like it's just not necessarily going to be prime time for people to be taking photos. But I do other things. A lot of us diversify. We'll do headshots, we'll do branding sessions, things like that, so that we can fill that time. But this is something to really be aware of. I'm really paying attention to the fact that, okay, is my business seasonal? Like, am I going to make all of my money between May and October? And then am I going to work at all in those next few months? And if I'm not, how am I allocating that? How am I budgeting so that I can not freak out in the winter? So, we know that neglecting that is going to lead to more debt. It's going to, missed opportunities a lot of times. Like a lot of times people will tell me like, I really wanted to be able to invest in something, and they can't because they haven't been, they didn't budget for the year, basically. So you definitely want to be paying attention to that money coming in and the money going out. And that's part of that weekly date. That's part of that stuff that you're looking at so that you can plan accordingly and that you can create these little micro budgets too. Like we were talking about before of like those little sub accounts of your savings. Well, you can do the same thing with like the actual budgets, right? Because it's kind of the same thing. It's like I'm saving for something, but also like what do I need to spend money on, right? So yeah, you definitely want to look for these, these common areas, some of the things that we talk about a lot with what we do. Taxes, obviously. Second shooters is a really big one. Obviously, owner's pay. Hello, you got to pay yourself. Highly recommend reading Profit First if you have not. Second shooters, like also makeup artists, hair, like that's a big one for me. I've included hair and makeup artists in my senior sessions from the very beginning. Obviously, also gear and equipment. I just had to invest in a lot of new gear. Granted, it was not by choice. All my stuff got stolen. That's a whole other topic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was not fun. Side note, insurance leads me right into insurance. Make sure you have insurance and that you're paying for it and budgeting for it. And then obviously like your rainy day fund. I'm sure that there's a lot of other things you guys could, add to this list. Again, there's a lot of softwares that we need, there's, it used to be like, oh, okay, I just have Lightroom, but now there's a few other ones. Like I love Evoto. So that's a different type of platform where you just kind of pay, you buy bulk credits. It's not necessarily something that you're buying up front. So there's all these little different things that go into your business that you need to budget for. And I highly recommend like your first date with money might be a little bit longer than 30 minutes if you've never done it, just as a side note, but that's part of what you're doing. I want you to just like really outline every single thing that needs to go into this budget to get your business to move forward. Virtual assistants is another big one. Okay. So a lot of you guys really need to take on an assistant, even if it's just 10 to 15 hours a month, because you're killing yourself on everything. Let's face it. We are like literally a solopreneur. We're doing everything and wearing all the hats in our business, but do we really need to do that is kind of what I want to just throw at you for a second, because if you could, what if, you could find someone like a VA to take something off your plate that you don't love doing. Okay. And it could be sending out emails or invoicing, or it could be social media, which is the biggest pain point for you guys. But my point here is that a lot of you think that you can't afford that. And the reason that you say that is because you don't know what your money is doing. I can't tell you how many times I'll get on like a discovery call with a photographer and I'll ask them like, how much money did you actually make in profit last year? And they don't know. And they don't know how to project out for the next month either. So that's part of this is like, you don't know that you can afford a VA because you don't know what your money's doing. But if you start to budget and you start actually really getting in your money and playing with it and having fun with it, you can budget for a VA. And that is really going to create a lot more space for you to move your business forward, to do the things that you love to do, which is probably not any of this. But you know, you gotta look at it first, right?
Totally. And it is something we hear all the time. I've found with all of the small business owners across industries is that people say I sometimes per your survey results, like I know what I need to be tracking. I know at a high level like the categories I should be budgeting for, but where do I do that? Do I do that on like a spreadsheet?
Yeah.
How do I create these like pools of money without opening like 15 different bank accounts?
Hmm.
And so a sneak peek of our product, which we'll talk about in much more detail next week, is a feature called Pockets. And so
Yeah.
this is a screenshot of the mobile experience. There's also a much more enlarged desktop experience where you can essentially create these like separate categories, these pools of money. So one for taxes is automatically calculated for you, for profit, for owner's pay. You could create one for gear and equipment. And then essentially what we allow you to do is anytime you get income into your found account, so say you send an invoice and a client pays you, or you have direct deposit set up, anytime there's money coming in, you can automatically allocate a percentage of that income to each of these pockets. And so say you want to be saving for taxes, we can give you a recommendation for what percentage of income based off of information you told us about your business, you should be automatically setting into the taxes pocket. Say you have a savings goal for gear and equipment. You want to save $10,000 for gear and equipment. You can set that savings goal and then automatically set up a custom, say 10% of all income to go towards gear and equipment. So this is really powerful, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about it next week. But like, it's really powerful that you can create this system of different pockets for different categories of your business or different goals, each with their own deposit allocations, percentage of income, and therefore you're ensuring that you're not spending money. That's not coming in the door. It's like truly based off of cash flow. And so for every paycheck, maybe 25% is going to taxes, 10% is going to a second shooter's pocket, and maybe another 10% is going to gear and equipment. And so you're constantly kind of leveling up those different savings goals as you level up the money coming through the door.
This is like my favorite aspect I found. Like this was kind of because again, like I was like, how am I going to create all these accounts? Like that's really the first, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because that's really kind of and bringing it back to like the spreadsheet. Like yeah, a spreadsheet can be great, but you know, that's not my skill set. Like it just isn't. And so I love the fact that it can be automated to go
yeah,
into each of it does it on its own. And so you don't have to think about it because again, like we don't need to be thinking about all these things. I love that it's automated and you can kind of set this up and then just let it go. That's like the
for sure.
coolest aspect. So yeah, Perry's going to walk us through that in depth next week on the podcast. So tune in for that because that's going to be super fun for you guys. And also, just as a side note, you can watch, and I highly recommend, you can always watch my podcast on YouTube. But I highly recommend next week's that you watch it on YouTube because he's going to be walking us through it and it's nice to see the visual. So, yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Or
Number four, I know we've been alluding at the big T word taxes throughout this live thus far, but the next two mistakes, the final two mistakes, are really going to hammer home things we see people do regarding taxes. And the first one is not even having a tax strategy at all. And so this will be a bit of a like taxes 101. This is informational purposes. I am not a tax accountant. I'm not a tax professional. This is based off of like high level publicly available knowledge about how taxes work, and then some of the best practices that we see at Found in working with small business owners as they navigate taxes. Um, I want to start with a little bit of a funny tweet, which I think sums up the U.S. tax system pretty well. My son asked what taxes are, and I gave him a bag of M&Ms and explained that he has to give some to me, and I know how much he has to give me, but he has to guess, and if he's wrong, he goes to prison. Um, a bit of an exaggeration, but I'd say like it sums up the anxiety that a lot of people feel when it comes to taxes. You're kind of guessing how much you owe, and then crossing your fingers that come April, come tax time, that you're paying the right amount, and that if not, you might be fined or even worse. But fear not, you're not alone. Individuals feel this, but small business owners feel this, and self-employed folks feel this in particular because their tax situation is a bit more nuanced. It's a bit more, and it's not as automated for them. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the common mistakes people make, and then also how to avoid them. A quick refresher on how taxes work. The IRS, the government entity that manages taxes in the U.S., has a pay-as-you-go model. So essentially, what that means is for all people, whether they're employees or self-employed, they want you to be paying taxes throughout the year. As a W-2 employee, so if you're working for an employer, working for a company, your employer will withhold some taxes from each of your paychecks and actually pay that to the IRS throughout the year. So you don't actually have to until you settle up at the end of the year. But when you're self-employed, that income that's coming to you is not having taxes withheld from it. And so what the IRS recommends is that you pay quarterly taxes based on what you think you'll owe. So an estimate, and we'll talk about what kind of break that down about what should go into that quarterly tax estimate. And then at the end of the year, you're similarly settling up for your true tax bill by adding up all of your income, understanding your expenses or deductions, and then seeing what the gap is on what you actually owe versus what you've already paid. So you can already see here in these two different paths, the W-2, that if you're an employee, it's much more simple. If you're self-employed, it gets a lot more complicated. And it's really important to have a strategy to stay on top of taxes so that you're maximizing tax savings, one, and also minimizing time and stress when it comes to actually filing your taxes every April.
Mm-hmm.
And so just lastly, kind of double clicking into the taxes that you'll be paying throughout the year. So when you're self-employed, you pay in a large part two different taxes. Income tax, which is pretty straightforward. This is based off of how much money that you make in the previous tax year. This is what's being withheld as a W-2 employee, but as a self-employed person, you'll need to be paying on a quarterly basis. And then similarly, as part of that quarterly tax payment, self-employment tax, which is unique to self-employed people. And so this is a combination of Social Security and Medicare. W-2 employees will have these taxes taken out of their paychecks. So like half of this will be taken out of their paycheck. The other half will be paid by their employer. But if you're self-employed, if you work for yourself, you'll have to pay this entire approximately 15.3% as part of your tax bill in addition to income tax. So we often see a lot of people don't realize that they should have been setting money aside and paying that additional 15.3%, which can cause a huge headache and a lot of kind of anxiety when they get hit by an unexpected tax bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we've heard this, and I'd love you to chime in here too on what you've seen with folks you work with, Renee. But
Yeah.
neglecting a tax strategy can lead to a lot of, time, money, stress lost. Not only are you getting potentially hit by this tax bill come April, you also might just be leaving money on the table by missing potential tax deductions or tax credits. And we'll talk a
Yeah.
little bit about how deductions work and how to stay on top of them and how to maximize them. But this is really big. And like, not only are you maybe not budgeting money for taxes, you also might even just be paying more taxes than you need to.
Yep.
Um,
Absolutely. I've seen that a
Similarly,
lot. Mm-hmm.
you have, yeah. And we'll talk. I'd love you to chime in as we talk about deductions on some of the common deductions that you as a photographer or your
Yeah.
other photographers take, and then some of maybe the common ones that people might miss, which we'll
Yeah.
talk about in a few slides.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely definitely all about trying to get as many deductions as possible. But you got to make sure, I'll always like, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I have an accountant. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not the final
Sure,
say in in my
for sure.
I would not want to be the final say. However, I want to be able to categorize things, right? Like he has taught me, what I can be doing. And so that makes it a lot easier for me to be able to plug that into my software, and make
Yeah,
that into the categories that I need, that I know, so that I can run those at the end of the quarter and also at the end of the year, I can just run all of that and say, okay, this is how many deductions I have in each of these categories. Like under advertising, you would have, okay, maybe if I did any kind of ads, okay, so that would obviously be under that. But also, there's a lot of other things I can kind of go under that category as well. If I had a branding session done, if that's, I had a new website done, if I redid my site, if I all of those things go under your website and all of those
Yeah.
different like intricacies of the website too. So like not just your domain host, but also like, I have show it. And so then there's all these other little categories of like all these things that go under this one umbrella, but then you get very specific about what they
Yeah.
are, you know? And so it's important to know what all of those little different pieces are because, yeah, you are using that for ads, essentially, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a really good point. And well, maybe I think it's a good segue to the next slide of the key to having a tax strategy and avoiding a lot of this is obviously kind of some of the themes throughout today's session are get organized and follow a process. I
Yeah.
mean, it's there's a relatively straightforward like four-step process that you should kind of constantly be staying on top of during that weekly date with your money. And
Mm-hmm.
that's essentially in order to understand your tax burden and to kind of optimize your tax strategy, you add up all your income. So as part of that weekly date, understanding like what are all the invoices that were paid, what's all the money coming into my account from various sources, whether shoots, consulting, headshots, etc. Step two is a big one that I think a lot of folks kind of fall behind on, which is categorizing and calculating expenses. So, as a business owner, expenses are really important, not only to understand that side of your balance sheet, but also because many of them across several categories, which we'll talk about in a second, are tax deductible, meaning that expense can actually lower the amount of income that you'll be paying taxes on. And so by staying on top of and categorizing expenses throughout the year, even on a weekly basis, you can ultimately lower your taxable income and lower the amount of taxes you need to pay. The third one's actually, come time to file taxes is actually not procrastinating on that paperwork and actually submitting your tax forms, which we'll talk about in just a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, actually making the payment to the IRS. Um, you
Yeah.
can see there's 4 snapshots of our mobile app here as well. Again, we'll talk about a lot of these in more detail next week. But spoiler alert, we're excited that Found can help to, from the comfort of your bank account, we're an online bank account, allow you to both not only save for taxes using pockets, but also really keep track of like real time through reporting and an expense transaction log, like how much income do I have? How many
Mm-hmm.
expenses do I have? Um, what are the categories of those expenses? And then as I categorize those expenses, either automatically or manually, how does that influence how much I'm saving on taxes?
Yeah. And I'll put just as a side note, we're going to be talking about this, like Perry said, in detail next week, but I will post a link below in the comments with you guys if you guys definitely you can go and poke around as well. You can check it out on your own now if you'd like to. So I'm going to do that now before I forget because I know that we're kind of showing you some like previews and I don't want to leave you hanging.
Sure. And it's free to sign up. It takes a few minutes to sign up. So I encourage folks to check it out ahead of the podcast, and then the podcast will be
Yeah.
a good opportunity to walk through it.
Yeah. Okay. I put that in the comments.
And then on the deduction piece, yeah, Renee, I'd love to hear from you based off of all the
Mm-hmm.
photographers you've worked with. What are some of the common deductions that you see photographers could be, and then what are
Yeah.
some of them maybe that people are missing?
Well, those are definitely, some of them right there on the screen, obviously, like the ones that we mostly think about. But there's also like permits, like sometimes, I mean, we don't love to have to buy permits for locations, but sometimes we have to. Um, you know, uh, your insurance and I mean like there's a lot of different ones even inside of the home office like or even just office in general, right? Like so under office supplies, like I was talking about before with advertising, like there's a lot of different little subcategories within each of those things. So
Yeah.
if you have a studio, for example, obviously you need like all the things to make the studio work, but also the furniture in the studio, the food that you serve your clients, you know what I mean, like the water, if you have like a water system. Props are a big one too, because a lot of photographers have a lot of different props, and styling, right? So a lot of us have style closets for our senior clients, and so even if it's like thrifted and stuff like that, like all of those little things that make up the pieces of your business, you want to like get very good clarity on what that is. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people, um, unless you've got, a tax professional who kind of really shows you exactly what to do, it's hard to know. So that's why it's good to have a system that'll help you at least say, hey, did you want to categorize this?
For sure. And it can also be, it doesn't have to be one or the other necessarily, is we see a lot of folks use Found to help kind of categorize expenses, stay on top of it, and then they'll actually invite their accountant in. We have an
Yes,
accountant access feature where their accountant or bookkeeper can actually come in and actually see all those cleaned up transactions and help them prepare their tax paperwork, which makes for happy clients
yeah,
and that it's cleaned up, and then happy accountants more importantly, because it's not a shoebox of receipts or a bunch of messy transactions.
for sure.
Totally. Yeah, these
Yep.
are really these are all pretty common. Mileage, I think a lot
Yes.
of people don't realize is like if you're driving to shoots, like you
Yeah.
can track that mileage and count that as a deduction. And there's plenty of information online on how to do that. Um, the other one I just want to call out before we get into some of the paperwork as part of the fifth mistake is makeup artists and second shooters, kind of like
Yeah.
subcontractors or contractors. There's they're a big expense for a lot of folks, and they're often a tax deduction. But there's also some tax paperwork involved with that, which some people may or may not be aware of. And so we'll touch
Yep.
on that as part of the last category, which is mistake number five, procrastinating on tax paperwork.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about procrastinating on a lot of aspects of your finance, but I'd say myself included, like the paperwork piece of it of actually, okay, I have all this data. How do I go about actually like filling out, preparing all the papers, and then actually submitting them,
Yeah.
even if I'm using like a digital method to file my taxes?
Yep.
And, and so again, I'm not a tax professional, but this is a high level informational overview. The way I like to think about tax forms is there's some forms that you receive as a self-employed person, and there's some that you file. And so the forms that you'll receive, anytime you're paid over $600 from a client or some other project, you should receive a 1099 NEC form to report non-employee compensation. So this is essentially like your self-employed income is reported on your 1099. And as part of that process, you'll typically first receive a W-9 from, let's say, a client who's paying you money, which is a request for your taxpayer information with your tax ID and a few other pieces of information. A client or employer will send that to you. You'll send it back to them, and then they'll send a 1099 for you. Um, there also are a few other specific forms you may be receiving throughout the year, depending on your circumstance. A 1099-K is increasingly popular,
Yeah.
which is reporting income received via P2P apps. So think like Venmo or
Yep.
online marketplaces. And so this is if you are receiving payments through Venmo, this is constantly evolving year on year on like what the
Hmm.
thresholds are that trigger these forms and how that differs from other sources of income. So I'd highly recommend if you're receiving client payments through Venmo, P2P apps, online marketplaces, that you consult a tax professional on how you should be handling that in the paperwork come tax
Yep.
time.
Definitely. Yeah, they keep changing it. It's weird.
Yeah, and I know it's common for freelance creatives, especially to receive
Yeah.
payments through Venmo. So
Well, it's not
it's
even just
important.
Venmo. Like it was, I mean, well, it was before until they changed the threshold, but even through like Square and um, Stripe and even PayPal, right? Like if you're
Mm,
accepting payments from all of these different types of places, um, you would automatically get that form. But now they've changed the threshold, at least for now, and who knows what they're going to do in the future. But yeah, it's definitely something that you need to be paying attention to.
yeah. So that's a quick overview of what you'll receive. And then in terms of the forms that you'll file, the two main ones are the Schedule C So that's where you report all of your income and expenses as a self-employed person. That's kind of your main tax form. And then the Schedule SE, which reports self-employment taxes. There's a few others specific to certain circumstances. So like one to call out, if you're calculating a home office deduction, Form 8829 is one to be
Mm-hmm.
aware of. Um, but I'd say Schedule C and Schedule SE, which we talk about a bit more in detail here, are the two main tax forms that you'll be preparing and filing in April. Even if you're not doing this, old-fashioned manually, you'll want to digitally generate these as you're applying either yourself or through an accountant.
Yeah,
Um, and just one call out. This is if you're a sole prop or an LLC, not if you're filing for as an S corp or a C corp. And
that's what I was
so
gonna say. Yeah.
one clarification here is, yeah, this is for the former category, and so there's some specific forms for S corp and C corp, which are maybe less common that of folks that are
Yeah.
using our app and that we're working with, but have their own path that I think Renee you're familiar with.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I think that I'm glad that you clarified that because I forgot to say that up top too. But yeah.
Yep. And just the last thing I'll note here is you see on the right, again, another screenshot of the Found app. And so we'll talk about it more next week, but we can help you to streamline this. But we already have all your income and expense information. And so we can help you to auto-generate a Schedule C and even for Schedule C filers, file your taxes through the app
Mhm.
to help speed up, even if you've procrastinated a little bit, to help speed up that process come
Yeah.
tax time.
Yeah. A little side note too. Yes, there is. I'm just seeing like a question coming up on the comments. Yeah, there's if you've got questions, you can go ahead and pop it in the thread now. And we're almost there. We're gonna kind of be wrapping up the fifth one now, and then we'll open it up to some questions if you guys have them and if we can answer them. And before we wrap up, yeah. So if you have one, just go ahead and pop it in. Okay.
That's great timing because this is the last slide. This is just a bit of a reminder that of some of the key tax dates of 2024. So we talked a lot about how you're filing annually. April 15th has passed. We survived. There are quarterly estimated tax due dates. So June 17th, September 16th, January 15th are all coming up. And so important to put that in your calendar and stay on top of that so that you're making those payments in a timely fashion.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And then this is just a standard disclaimer that keep my compliance team happy. Um, so just a found we've talked a lot about we're a banking app. We have an online banking, online checking account, a debit card, all these other tax tools and expense management tools. Found's not a Found is a financial technology company, not a bank. So business banking services are provided by Piermont Bank, a member FDIC. The funds in your account are FDIC insured up to $250,000 per depositor per each account ownership category. And the Found MasterCard business debit card is issued by Piermont Bank pursuant to a license from MasterCard Incorporated and may be used everywhere MasterCard debit cards are accepted. Found's core features, including most of what we talked about today, are free. And we also have a premium paid subscription called Found Plus, which I encourage folks to check out.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, you guys are gonna love the little walkthrough that we do next week. I had even, I was playing with it for a while and like actually syncing stuff up in there. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize it could do all of this. So like when, like I really was pleasantly surprised by a lot of the features, let's just say, like when I was able to kind of like poke around and figure stuff out. So, and as a creative and a visual, it's just really good to see that. You can kind of talk about it and we can definitely like say, oh yeah, here's what you need to do. But like it's different when you actually see it, working and how easy. And like we talked about before, all the way that it's designed is very aesthetically pleasing. That's really nice. So yeah. All right, let's see if anybody has any questions. Anybody have any questions? I know there's just a few people watching. Hello, hello. Thank you guys for watching. Yeah, okay. So, oh, Anjanette says she has a problem with this year because PayPal and Stripe are no longer offering it, the 1099K, like we were talking about. They said it is because they only offer them if you make a certain amount. and I definitely exceeded that amount. Ooh, that's interesting. How do I get that form of the data? I could really use a tax person. Yeah, no, it can be really hard, especially if you've got any kind of neurodivergence. Yeah, for sure. Um, I don't know that answer. My accountant is the one who told me because I asked him, hey, I'm not getting I wasn't issued 1099s this year. Like,
Mm,
what's the deal? And he's the one who was like, yeah, they raised the threshold by a lot, like a lot. And so, unless you're making like a ridiculous amount of money, you really don't need to. He's like, if you didn't get it, you didn't get it. Like it, you know what I mean? Like that's just kind of how it is. So I
mm,
find it interesting that if you say that you did pass that threshold and they didn't send it, I think that that's definitely something that you need to reach out to those companies to, like PayPal and Stripe specifically. That's probably where I would go to first. I don't necessarily have all the data on that though, because again, I'm not a tax professional and I definitely don't want to be, but I have systems. But yeah, I would say definitely go check that out with those systems, with PayPal and Stripe. Ask them what the deal is, and if it wasn't reported, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not really sure how that would work, but yes, they did raise them a lot though. So it may be a discrepancy on your end. I'm not sure. Sorry, I can't be of more help for that. No worries. Yeah. Yeah. All right. If there's no more questions, I'm going to remind you guys. I'm just making sure I'm not missing any because there's a little bit of a delay too, like because we're
mm,
streaming from Zoom, so I always want to kind of give it a little bit of a like a 20-second delay between stuff
totally.
because I can't see on my phone like in real time. So yeah, so if you guys have any other questions, pop them in real quick, and if not, definitely next week. I don't know if there's the last slide there. We're going to be walking through the platform and how it can really help you streamline your banking and your bookkeeping and your taxes even. And when I tell you, it's like it's like I said, it's very seamless and a lot of it is very intuitive and does it on its own once you set it up. So it's so good for us. I'm excited to introduce you guys to it in a little bit more detail next week. So all right, I don't think we have any more questions. Let me just double check one more time and scroll up. And hopefully, if you guys missed this live, you can rewatch this because there's a lot of good info here. And if you have any questions, just hit me up. You can find me here in the group, obviously, but I'm pretty active in the DMs on my Instagram too. So you can always find me there. And thank you, Perry, for doing this with me. I think it's such an important topic, and I just want to try and desensitize as many creatives to this stuff as possible.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I know finances and taxes are not fun to talk about. And so I think our hope is that this was both a way to be kind of reflective, I guess, on the role of finances in your business and in your life, and then also had some very tangible strategies with the weekly date and staying on top of expenses and common deductions that you can take away to run your finances more seamlessly.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you guys know I'm always talking about like the mindset stuff when it comes to the money. So if you have any questions about that and I definitely can help on that end. So just let me know. And I'm excited to share the whole platform next week. So tune in. I will be reminding you guys, of course. If you're on my list, you're going to get the email. But thank you guys for joining. This was super fun. I'm excited that we got to do it. And I'm excited that the tech worked because it took me about a week to figure out how to make the tech work. Because Facebook loves to change things, but yay, we got it done. So thanks, Perry, and you guys have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.